This episode of the Book of Very, Very Bad Things podcast has been brought to you by our sponsors at Sweet Cheetah Publicity. Sweet Cheetah is a PR collective that values people over profit. They put a different spin on public relations by working primarily with friends and using all profits to aid charitable organizations. With a roster that includes Jawbox, The New Amsterdams, Brainiac, Get Some, Funeral Date, Damian Dunn, and many more artists, record labels, and podcasts. Sweet Cheetah! That's a great PR cohort. You can find them on social media by simply searching Sweet Cheetah PR, and they'll be there. He's been Tim, I've been Peter, and Sweet Cheetah has been beautiful.
If I'm the curse to win this, I would. If I could to win this, I would. You're back.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Book of Very, Very Bad Things podcast. I'm your host, Peter, and I am still here. We're back. We're back for another couple of weeks, and then we go on another break, sad to say. We are at the tail end of Book 2. I can't wait for you to hear what we have coming in the next year. It has been 2 years, guys. We've been doing this a long time. And I'm so happy to have the likes of Dave Clifford to bring us to the end, or near end, of this round. Folks, Dave Clifford has been making music for a very long time. From the groups again, Jail Weddings, Marriages, Red Sparrowes, Slaves, Tarot Bolero, Lion Fever, the VSS, and Pleasure Forever. The VSS is the first time Dave came into my consciousness. My old band played with them at a record store forever ago. The VSS split, and 3 of the 4 members formed the group Pleasure Forever, who got signed to Sub Pop Records, created some of the most eclectic, strange, and gothic without being goth music that ever came out on that label. They've been away for decades and are now back with the incredible EP Distal. The first half of the conversation solely lies in the sphere of music, and then Dave and I start to break down some walls, I guess, within the confines of the conversation, and get into the meat of what we're both really about. And that's where the magic happens, right around the 40-minute mark, maybe. I'm excited for you to hear this. I think Dave is the coolest guy, like one of the coolest I've ever met on this show. I really, really appreciate and enjoy this conversation. I don't want to beleaguer this point, but brilliant human being. If you dig what you're hearing, if you're a long-time listener, first-time listener, please like, rate, subscribe, review wherever you listen to podcasts. At the end of this coming October, we will bring you Book 3 of the podcast, the 3rd season. I keep threatening this, but we're really going to change the format dramatically for that 3rd season, that 3rd book. That doesn't mean we're going to stop doing what we do or giving it to you in the manner we do. It's just going to be a little bit more professional, a little bit more produced, a little less indie, I guess. But without further ado, I give to you Dave Clifford of Pleasure Forever on the Book of Very, Very Bad Things podcast. Thank you, everyone. All right. So how are you this, afternoon where you're at, correct?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm wonderful, and I'm seeing that you live very similarly to myself with massive amounts of vinyl behind you. Mm-hmm. You've been collecting since you were pretty young, I would imagine, like myself.
Yeah. I guess I got into punk when I was like 12 or so, and just ever since then, buying lots of records.
Yeah, it's sadly taken over a majority of my home at this point. My wife is starting to get fed up with me. But
I like that setup where you can see the covers.
That's only for the show. Normally they're slotted in. Otherwise, like if I left them like this, my son, I had a child pretty late in life. My kid's 4. He would be knocking them down and putting his Matchbox cars on them if I left them like that.
I in the same situation. I've got we've got a 5-year-old, and he's generally kind of okay about handling records because he really likes to listen to The Model by Kraftwerk and the Star Wars soundtrack. So we've got those are his 2 records.
Oh wow! So he's into orchestral and electronica.
Yeah. Trying to teach him right, I guess.
So it's been legitimately 20 years since the last record by you folks.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as I told you via email, I have played shows with the VSS in the past in my old band. It came from the ashes of Angel Hair into the VSS. That's where you come into play, and into Slaves, which becomes the band now. That's a long history right there. The 20-year gap in between records. How do you feel that like kind of changed the way you guys approached this record as opposed to the last two?
I guess it's well, the conditions kind of made that necessity, because all of us live in different cities, and the other two records we used to practice like 5 nights a week and would just work on stuff, and we had this crazy whiteboard system where we would most of the time just go in and just start playing, and whatever kind of came out, we would go like, hey, that's a good part, and we would just write it down on the whiteboard, and then we just kind of collect parts, and then over time go like, oh, I bet that part could go into that one, and we would just kind of like put everything together in this kind of like jigsaw puzzle of sound, and that was a very interesting way of doing stuff. I mean, tons of bands do that. It's not like super unique, but to do this, it was kind of we just started talking to each other, and we're just sort of like, hey, you want to try exchanging some stuff and just see. We were sort of calling it like an Exquisite Corpse kind of a project.
I was just going to say that exactly like Exquisite Corpse. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I would go and record, just do a drum part and send it to Andy, and then he would just like start putting some piano stuff to it, or he would send me a piano thing and I would just put some drums to it. So it's not exactly Exquisite Corpse because you knew what you were adding on to, but we would still get some stuff. And that process was kind of working pretty well. It was kind of interesting, but we made a lot of the stuff out of some limitations, but during the process we were comparing it to the Devil's Pleasures record that we made excuse me again back in 1999, where we were all again living in different places, and we just planned like, let's take a week and we'll put together a record. So we all kind of had ideas, and we got together and we just practiced for hours and hours and wrote a bunch of stuff, and then we went in the studio and recorded it, and we don't feel like the results of that were particularly great. It was just kind of like, well, here's what we got, and we went with that. But yeah, just so for this thing, it was more like, well, we were not doing it to release it for anybody. It was just to kind of like just for fun, and share stuff back and forth and see what came out, and more just like an exercise. I suppose, I guess it's just sort of out of our familiarity with each other and our ability to just kind of like bounce off what others were doing. We just went with it and came up with the stuff, and then after a while we decided, okay, well, we have this stuff, maybe why don't we just put it on Bandcamp and just like let it be out there. People can hear it if they want to hear it, and like not make a big deal about it, and just kind of like have it be something. It's kind of and then so I've been working with the guys doing the label Solid Brass. It just started last year, and it all just kind of like coalesced in a simple, easy way of just kind of like Jason, the guy who started the label, we had met way back when he lived in Cleveland, and he was just asking, like, what Andy was up to, what Josh was doing, and I said, "Oh yeah, well, we recorded some stuff and everything," and so it kind of went from there.
It's really interesting, though. With this record specifically, there's almost a sort of uncanny valley about it. It's very creepy. I mean, and you guys, you could always sort of nail down a creepy sound, but there's something inherently almost like creeping over your left shoulder about this record. It's like, you know what I mean? It's almost indescribable. What I really dug about it, though, was how it's so tuneful. It's so melodic and mellifluous at points, but even at its most beautiful, at its most almost orgasmic, there's something inherently dark brewing just beneath the surface of it. Could you kind of speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's I don't know what that is either. It's like when each of us makes music in other things, it doesn't really sound like that. I don't think. I think like the second Red Sparrowes record kind of had some of that darkness to it. And I guess that was just, I don't know, some sort of a vibe there. But this, for the most part, I think like just there's the combination is sort of like the way the things that Andy plays, his melodies and instrumentation, I think kind of has this ominous sound to it. And I mean, I don't bring this up to say, like we're like so great or like in any caliber of musicianship or anything like this, but it reminds me of Led Zeppelin, not in like, hey, we're, four, really great musicians. It reminds me of like how Led Zeppelin was just a blues band, some studio musicians playing the blues, but it has this like scariness or some like there's a weird mood to it. And of course there's Jimmy Page was really into like
Crowley
and stuff like that, and or heavy into Crowley, and none of our it's not really intentional or any sort of a kind of thing. It's kind of what comes out, I guess, of the combination between us. But it, like, when I listen to it too, I'm just kind of like, why does this sound so like creepy or whatever? It's like, I mean, we're all old now. I'm a dad, and it's just sort of it's just something that I guess is the comment, I guess.
Yeah, and there, even down to the title of the record, it has like it's referencing memory, right? Distal, as in distal memory. It kind of makes sense because, like, when you look at the large swath of time that you folks have been making music together, even with such a large break in between, a distal memory is a memory. The way you view your past, basically, like in a very painted in almost rose-colored light. But in fact, this is quite the opposite of that. It's got that inherent darkness to it that you can't really put your finger on, and it's not like satanic or death metal or whatever. But it's the truly creepy music in the atmosphere is always. It's not on the nose, you know what I mean? And even lyrically, you guys aren't really going for that, but they're unintentionally, that combination just, it dredges something up almost psychically. It's kind of beautiful and unique. I'm surprised that, it took so long though, for you guys to finally reconnect. What was kind of like the catalyst for the last recorded Syllable of Time? I think there's something very, very, very creepy about that song specifically.
Yeah. I mean, I guess probably the note structure of it is very awkward, I guess, and it's sort of well, I guess the origin of that song. Let's see, what was it was Andy had an idea of doing treated piano with he has a piano at home. That's how he did all the piano recordings, and he recorded it with forget what he put. He was wrapping, like, might have just been paper, like this sort of like an old technique that was done, and you wrap things on that really mutes the strings when you play it, and the hammer hits it, and it's that first the boop, 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 that part that comes in is a piano, but the strings are super muted, so they just have that strange plucky sound. He did that first, and I heard it, and that was actually, I guess, the first song that we did. Actually, that was like the very beginning of the whole project, and I heard it, and it was just like, oh yeah, put a slow, heavy drum beat on this. It would sound cool. And so we had that part, and kind of did that, and then he was just like, oh, I came up with an idea with an acoustic guitar playing that melody that then would lead into it, and the song just kind of developed from there. And so he and I started working on stuff first, and then after we started going like, well, this is kind of working, and we got some good ideas here. I mean, why don't we ask Josh if he wants to contribute to it also? And because it's like, then we could put it out and call it Pleasure Forever, and that'd be kind of fun. And the whole kind of the reason for it was, after a few people that we had known were dying, like there was all kinds of stuff going on, and I just kept thinking of just like, I wonder how everybody's doing, because we haven't talked in a really long time. I would see Josh every couple of years, or see him sometimes, and I mean, we all have kind of stayed in touch, but we weren't like connected with each other or anything. So we asked him, and he said yeah. So he got involved too, and then he added parts, and then we just sort of like started to piece it all together and edit it. I guess that doesn't really answer your question properly, but
it does, though, because to me there was something, and I love the whole record, I truly do. That song really, really struck me, and I called it creepiness, but there's something more than that. There's a spiritual kind of attachment to it almost. It makes sense that that's the first song you guys had put together, because I think it really is the linchpin of the record. Mm-hmm. I want to go back on you, though, a little bit, just to take a little detour. Since you are an avid collector like myself, and you were 12 when you got into punk rock, kind of like myself. I was a little younger, but what was the first, like your first love, that first bite that made you seek music out? That first song, first band, first whatever, where you could say, okay, this is where the path from just listening to the radio and being happy diverged into what I've become now. What do you think that first moment was?
Well, I guess there are probably kind of a couple of those. For me, it was like, well, growing up in the 70s, it was like, I always kind of compared it to Crocodile Dundee, the thing like wherever he turns on the TV, it's always I Love Lucy, and it's like, why do people like this? And for me, it was sort of like the radio. Everything I heard on the radio was just like AM gold stuff, which I learned to appreciate now. But back then, it was just like, this is what rock music is. This like Neil Sedaka and whatever all the stuff that would be on the radio then, and even like my parents didn't listen to music. They didn't really have much interest in it, and so I didn't have any kind of like anything developing there for me. So I guess it really was Star Wars and John Williams music that was just like, well, so it's kind of interesting to me that my son just coincidentally, I haven't like tried to push anything on him, that he is really that stuff resonates with him. But that got me really into music and into, we had a piano at home that nobody ever played, and I just would sit there and play stuff on it, and I enjoyed it. So that was the beginning of that. And then it wasn't until I just always thought that rock music was stupid, and I just listened to classical music up until a friend of mine, his older brother came back from England and brought back a Sex Pistols record and the Germs record. It was like What We Do Is Secret 12-inch thing. Yeah. And, you know, he said, oh, my brother has this record with this guy singing on it. It's like, I am the Antichrist. I am the Antichrist. I was like, oh, really? What is that? I want to borrow that. And so, yeah, I just, I borrowed the record, and I was just like, oh, I hate this. This is terrible. But I kept listening to it, you know, because I was just like, why is this music? You know, it was like something so compelling because I needed an explanation for it. And yeah, I just kept listening to that. And then that was like, and I would just sit at home and come home from school, and I would draw and listen to those records over and over and over. And that started it. So I had to, you know, it was like Sex Pistols and Germs and Black Flag and the Decline of Western Civilization soundtrack and like all of that stuff. And then I had to kind of like backtrack to find out what rock music was. Yeah. So yeah, it was kind of that was the turning point, I guess.
That makes a lot of sense. And when you listen to Pleasure Forever and the approach, there is it's heavily inflected classical, just laying over the top of what could be construed as rock tropes, but it's so disjointed, just shot through the prism of rock and roll, that, you know, these different flavors. There's jazz involved in this record, especially. I can like there's jazz in there, there's classical in there, and then there's orchestral moments, all kind of like thrown into the mix. That it makes where you came from specifically make a ton of sense. Well, who was your favorite composer? I think I have an idea of who you would like, but
yeah, I mean, all the classical classics. I mean, you know, of course, Mozart, and I was into Beethoven and Tchaikovsky, and Wagner and Strauss, and just all the ones that were normal. You know, my uncle was really into classical music, and he would make tapes for me because once he heard I was into it, he was just like, "Oh, listen to this." And yeah, and he's lived in Boston. He would record the Boston Pops with John Williams conducting because he knew I was into John Williams. So like, it was always that. Yeah, mostly those. Not anything like too, but I did like bombastic, big classical music.
I would have had you pegged for a Rachmaninoff guy, to be honest.
Yeah.
That is Rachmaninoff is by far my favorite composer. I also enjoy Wagner, even though there are the ties to the Reich and whatnot. I mean, he wasn't in the concentration camps or anything, but you know, that dark, bombastic, just it's deeply affecting, and I could see how it sort of became metal in a way. You know what I mean? It makes total sense.
I'm forgetting Mussorgsky. I guess that was really also a really strong one too. I mean, like I loved like Night on Bald Mountain and stuff. And I guess also like I saw Fantasia too, and so it's just sort of like, okay, those are the ones that I'm gonna listen to. So, you know, because I was just a kid. It was like, you know, up until about 12 years old, I guess. So yeah, it didn't. My taste didn't get too developed as far as classical. I still listened to it later on, but yeah, it wasn't like super sophisticated then. But a lot of those other musical things, I mean, those are definitely Andy's contributions to stuff, because he's not trained. He took piano lessons when he was a kid, and knew how to play that. And but he just has like a musical affinity and real focus on that, and he knows music structure. And I played guitar when I was like up before I started to play drums, and I was really into that and learning how to do like inverting chords, changing notes of chords, and all kinds of stuff like that. And once I started getting into that and learning like circle of fifths and learning like real particulars, I lost all interest in guitar. I was just like, this isn't fun. It was kind of like, oh, I'm doing this. Everybody else has already done all this. This is lame. So, yeah. So I was kind of like, I have always tried to keep the the real knowledge of music at a distance, which I think is kind of contradictory to the way that I like to learn, and I like to know things, but for some reason it's sort of like it takes the emotional joy out of it for me to know how to play properly.
Well, because it becomes too academic then. And that's in my opinion kind of what made punk rock truly great was the fact that it wasn't academic, and it was a callback to the origins of rock and roll. And most importantly, it was people creating something with a disadvantage. You know what I'm saying? That they're limited. And when you're forced to create within limitations, that's when great things really happen, because you become inventive, and there's no such thing as playing it wrong. Look at The Edge from U2, for example. He is not a conventionally good guitar player. I would argue that a lot of what he plays is, I can't believe it counts as music, but I love it. Mm-hmm. But like up to a certain point, up until like, The Unforgettable Fire and Rattle and Hum and all of that, like it started to go off the rails for me. But before that, like Joshua Tree was kind of pinnacle. You know what I mean? And what he's playing, it's not blues chords. It's not anything identifiable. And I think that's what makes it beautiful. Because creating within limitations. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I have talked exactly about him specifically and that whole kind of thing, because like if you see that documentary, It Might Get Loud. I don't know if you ever watch that with Jack. Jimmy Page, and both of them are this kind of like, okay, when you see the three of them together, it's just like, oh, these guys are just doing the traditional stuff, and there's nothing wrong with the traditional things, and you can be great at the traditional things, but I can see the creativity and the real uniqueness of his playing in that, and also like in the classic albums thing, where if you've ever seen that, he's talking about writing that record and just like how inventive his playing is, and I think he's really a great guitar player, even just because he's relying on effects a lot as the structure. I don't see there's anything that makes him not a great guitar player. But
no,
doing it.
No, yeah. but I'm just speaking strictly from a traditionalist viewpoint. Yeah. He's not. Right. He's not Steve Vai, but I don't particularly want to listen to Steve Vai either. To me, there's no soul there. I would rather listen to The Edge. I would rather listen to Stevie Ray Vaughan. You know what I mean? So,
sure.
Coming from a place that's more purely spiritual, emotional, tactile. It's something I can identify with, because I could quite conceivably do something similar myself. Am I ever going to be able to play like, you know, any like Yngwie Malmsteen? No, never in a million years. But I probably could get an effects rack and string a couple chords together and make something fun and unique. And to me, that's the most interesting field of play. I saw you guys do it with the VSS. It was very free. You didn't even adhere to the rules of the scene that we were in and at that time period at all. You ignored it. You just painted on a very porous canvas. Like, it was almost a cross between Jackson Pollock and you know, maybe one of the absurdists. You didn't limit yourselves, and I think you're still carrying that spirit into this record. It's pretty obvious. Are you guys ever going to play out again?
Well, I'll answer that in a second, but I do want to say, like, also in mentioning the Edge, I really feel like even from the beginning, like when I first met Josh, and his playing in Angel Hair was like the Edge, reminded me of that. Whereas kind of like Josh is really, he's a great painter of sound, and he can take effects and he can utilize effects in a really creative way. And he's not concerned about, Josh is an incredible rhythm guitar player too. He can, and he always does parts that are very, very rhythmic and work with stuff. And he's just, I mean, I think he is a genius person, like no doubt about it. I mean, he went to, you know, like one of those genius schools instead of high school, and he graduated college before he was like 18 or 19 or something. And like, so when I met him, he was in graduate school when he was in Angel Hair, and he was 20 or 21, something like that. And he has that thing. And so like, I think we're super lucky to have that combination of Andy and Josh both having this wild creativity, but also kind of like a little bit at odds, because Andy's is more informed and Josh's is more abstract, and kind of like, but Josh is great with melody, and that was something we developed sort of over time in the VSS. Was sort of like, we tried to have melody, but the idea was aggression. Mm-hmm. And then I guess it was just sort of like, we got to a point where it's like, there's nothing else we can do with this. And then that's what we did after it. I think the first record was kind of, I was really leaning on an idea of, I got, for whatever reason, I just got super into pop music, like older pop music, and just like, you know, the structures of it, how it's all working. And I guess it was because I was working on a record label and we were putting out all this stuff. And then also, I guess it was at that time when people were all downloading music, you know, it's like when Napster was really taking off and you could just discover whatever. And so I, for whatever reasons, I got really obsessed a lot of older 60s pop music and stuff like that. So I was really like, you know, forcing that issue a bit with everybody to try to make our songs very with pop structures, but having like the kind of weirdness. And then after that, kind of like, you know, let go of that thing. So yeah, I mean, this stuff is kind of like a little bit more back to our earlier beginning points of, you know, everyone just kind of like creating things as their natural way. And then to answer the question about playing live, I would really like to, but it doesn't seem, there's not much interest from either of the other guys to play live. I think it seems to be one of those kinds of things where it's not quite so satisfying. I think Andy he doesn't enjoy playing live, probably because I could see it's pretty hard to play like complicated music, like complicated piano lines and organ at the same time, and singing and all that. At the time, it was pretty hard to really recognize what a challenge that was, because he just kind of like, it was just like, how does he do it? I mean, he could do keyboards and sing at the same time, and all of that. But yeah, it's just I wish we could do some live stuff, but I guess like from being distant places and all of those factors, I guess, just make it a little bit too. Right. We tried to do it for the VSS when we were doing a reissue of Nervous Circuits. We had shows scheduled and everything, and then it just kind of fell apart. So
I recall that. That was that when Hydra had reissued it, or when Sargent House got it?
Sargent House, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, because
I don't actually remember. Yeah,
because Hydra had reissued it. Like I want to say 10 years ago, and then when Sargent House, maybe more, yeah. And when Sargent House got a hold of it, they packaged both of the records together in one set and put it on. I have all of these, but I become very encyclopedic with pressings and stuff. It's ridiculous. I have problems.
I'm the same. It's okay. We're in the same mental ward of records.
I become a completist, which is financially a burden, because if it, let's say it's something like what's behind Cave In, okay, Until Your Heart Stops. I have legitimately owned every version of the vinyl.
Wow.
Not every single pressing, but like every time something is updated, remastered, or what have you. I get it. Same with the VSS. Like it just, there's certain bands especially that just, I have to have it or I feel weird.
I know you. Yeah. I mean, they're the same thing. There have been a few reissues where I'm just kind of like, I really don't need this. I know that even the new version is not going to sound as good as the original pressing is going to sound. But what if I didn't have it? Well, if you didn't have it, you wouldn't have it. But it's just, yeah. I mean, there's nothing that you can do to convince yourself that it's not going to be. You're not going to have that same experience with it that you did, or have a completely new experience with it. I know some other people that really get into tracking down the different places that they were pressed, because there are very, very noticeable differences in the plates and or like, if they were mastered in different locations and stuff. So it makes sense, it's
and it does become a little scary for me, especially because I'm the one paying for it all. But,
yeah.
What are the chances of you guys like doing this again, or is that even something you've discussed, or it's just you're taking it as it comes?
Well, yeah, I mean, the original idea was that we would do 2 EPs, because we wrote, we had kind of enough stuff, and we wanted to try to just do it quickly and get it finished and out. So we picked out, I guess, 4 or 5 songs that we thought, like, okay, these are finished enough. Let's just put those out, and then we'll finish up the other ones, and then we'll put out another EP, and we'll have, there'll be this one and that one. And that was kind of how Distal came up. Was I was just thinking of, I mean, I love your take on it. I think that is really good. I was thinking just a little more simplistically about distal parts of the body, like the furthest from the heart, and so where we could do like it could be a comparison of the musical corpus, I guess, and but then it kind of ended up is it was taking so long to get stuff done, and all kinds of the whole process like ended up being almost a year, and we're just like, okay, let's just put out these 7 songs and we'll call it a day. We'll do, like, this other stuff is just, it's not working. And the whole mood was getting kind of, everyone was getting frustrated and bringing up a lot of older issues and stuff. So it was just kind of like that. So I would hope sometime, it probably would be another long time before that can happen, but I hope not. I would to be able to either finish what we've done or try to do a different idea or whatever. But it was something for me. It was kind of like I was very relieved and very happy because I felt like we all kind of left off on a awkward note 20 years ago, and so it was like nice to get reconnected about all of that stuff. And it was kind of like hoping to, maintain that thing, and also to like create musical snapshots of where we are in our lives, and whether anybody cares about it or not, it was something for us to to share amongst ourselves.
So how's Solid Brass going to approach this as far as physical copies?
How do you mean?
Vinyl, cassettes, CDs?
So far they're kind of just primarily a vinyl label.
Great.
Digital. So yeah, there's this 12-inch, and that was also an idea of why we kept it to 7 songs, was I was kind of like, it would be great to be able to make this a 45, because
sounds better.
Yeah, 45, 12-inch 45s. And I think the record sounds, it sounds really good on the vinyl. It was kind of like, trying to master loud enough that everybody wants it to be at that loudness. I think like the digital version is pretty good, but it's just like super crispy and loud. But I mean, it's just, that's how a lot of people want it. But I think the record is dynamic and has nicer low end and all that kind of stuff. And, being able to make a 45, it's always, of course, record nerds talking about records, but it's just, like everybody always wants to like, 180 gram. I want 750 gram. It's not how thick the record is. It's not like that. You get much better sound out of a good recording, and 45, spread it out over a couple of records, all that kind of stuff. And that too was sort of like, do we do splattered vinyl and like all these colors? And then like, no, just clear vinyl sound, clear and black. Those ones sound the best. Like I know it's neato to have a record that has all those colors,
but they're not audiophile quality. They're just not.
Yeah, they sound shitty.
Yep. They sound terrible.
Really bad. Yeah. So we that was a thing. I was like, can we please just have these as clear and black? But so we did that, and it's on those formats. And I don't know. I mean, I guess like I hope that at some point a good format comes along. We could put it on cassette if people wanted it on cassette. Whatever, but yeah, it seems like good enough with 12-inch and digital.
Now you're doing work with Solid Brass as well, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Now what's your involvement with that label?
Well, because it was started with some old friends. It was kind of like an interesting thing. Like people, I met Jason like years ago, and we would kind of run into each other over the years, and we're friendly. And Justin, the guy, he was in several bands in Chicago, and we would stay with him when we go through there and hung out a lot. We actually played like his old band Thumbnail. The VSS played with them a couple of times. on our first tours, and so we knew Justin forever and like all of his history, starting Epitonic, the like MP3 site stuff, and running File 13 Records, and he worked at Touch and Go, and Chuck. Red Sparrowes, we did our merch with Chuck's old company, and then he's now at Cinderblock, which is a huge merchandise company.
Yep.
So, like the three of those guys starting a label, and when they asked me to do press for the label, I was just like, oh yeah, that is amazing. And so we just kind of like have developed a whole thing. We're trying to I know Jason is really invested financially and emotionally in the whole thing, and there's some amazing stuff coming out like that we're excited to be able to announce soonish. And yeah, I'm just kind of hoping to help let that develop into something. Like, it seems to have a lot of great potential, and they are all pretty serious about it, so I think it's a good thing.
Now, what sorts of bands is Solid Brass looking for? Is it just, it seems to me like just predicated on the fact that all of the people involved come from a similar scene, but it's also people who are very forward thinking. I'm guessing you're not just going to be putting out like grindcore records, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. You're going to go for a more eclectic approach to releasing bands. Like, it doesn't really matter what style they play.
Yeah, pretty much. I think it's kind of like a lot of it is, there was like the original concept to be more archival and trying to put out some of the stuff that is overlooked. But what we've already been seeing too is that like even the music that we all loved and came from and everything like has already been picked up by being reissued and stuff, like that Heroin record, Over Your Shoulder. It's
yep.
just like so many of the records that you can think of, there's like, why don't we do a great reissue of this thing? Oh, because Numero's doing it. Oh, because these guys Trust is doing it. Or so it's just like a lot of that stuff is taken up, and also it's kind of like, if you're only doing reissue stuff, it's hard to grow in another way. So that also the idea is kind of like putting out like-minded bands that exist today that are putting out interesting stuff, and we got some cool records coming out, like this band Normans. They're sort of like kind of like a girls against boys vibe, kind of like a noise rock thing. They're really good, and Product band from Minneapolis are so awesome. They're just like the early days of like the real like New York City kind of punk. They sound like Television, and yeah, they're really cool. And also like a little bit like early Pavement stuff. It's very intellectual, but great catchy music. Like they're really great. And other active older bands like sorry, something I can't announce yet. So
yeah.
There are a few other things like Pines of Rome, like they got back together again and stuff. So yeah, it's not just trying to be older stuff, but also newer things that have that feeling, I suppose.
That's pretty I think that's sorely lacking, because as you'd said, like within the confines of what's considered independent music, everything that was classic or quasi-classic, it's already being archived and reissued, repressed. To take the stance of looking for something that maybe could have existed 25, 30, 35 years ago, or give you that same feeling, and shine a light on that. I think that's very important, because most labels are codified. You know, you're never going to see Revelation Records putting out an industrial album, you know, or like, you know, everybody has their niche and they're comfortable in it, and that's fine. But it seems like your approach is, it's not necessarily a niche. It's more of a, you know, how does this make me feel? And I dig that. That's important. I think the label you guys used to be on, Sub Pop, at one point was very much like that.
Yeah.
I can't really speak to what they released now. I've lost a lot of touch with it, sadly. Just mainly because I'm approaching 50 and my tastes have certainly changed. But you know, there was a time when that was like the label you'd want to be on. You know, Sub Pop was incredible at one point. Just as SST was before them. You know, sometimes you just need to mix things up, you know, do something different. And I dig that about what you're doing. So I only have one pre-written question that I ask every person that comes on the podcast. Just one. Everything else is off the cuff, if you haven't noticed. But what I ask everyone is this. What is it that terrifies you on an existential level? I ask this because that's basically what makes us human, what we're terrified of. So I would posit that to you.
Well, I guess things change, of course. I guess the most terrifying thing to me now, being a parent, is that anything could happen to my son or just to my family. You know, it becomes your all-encompassing view. It's like, doesn't matter what happens to me, nothing can happen to this person. I guess that's probably the most terrifying thing. But I mean, there are tons of things that are also terrifying. I suppose it's maybe a succinct answer. I don't know.
See, like growing up, I was sadly an overthinker from Jump Street, and I used to watch Nova on PBS when I was a kid.
Love Nova.
I was about approximately my son's age, 4, maybe 5, and it was one of the episodes about you know, being cartographers of the known universe and mapping the stars, and they talked about there's a point basically where there has to be a nothing, there has to be a void, just blackness, no stars, no anything. That notion infected me and terrified me, and for some reason, the idea, outside of, like, you know, obviously my wife, my children, I mean, that's very terrifying, the idea of anything happening to them, but the kernel of my spirit at that age until now has just an innate fear of oblivion for some reason.
Okay, yeah, that definitely makes sense. I mean, that's something that for all people is sort of the idea of science, you know, the basis of it. The same kind of thing, I suppose, that maybe for me, because I have always thought so much about those things. My dad was a physicist, and so we would talk about science or things that are like in, you know, simplified terms, because, you know, he was always with that kind of thing. But I guess it was like I always arrived, like when people would talk about the Big Bang and things like that, I just like the concept of like a finite ball seemed absurd to me. I always thought of like Leibniz. When I read Leibniz and about the monadology, I was kind of like, well, why couldn't the universe just be a whole bunch of these cells, like cell universes that are all like attached to each other, and like it goes on forever? And it's more scary to me to think that everything just goes on forever and ever. Everything is like bigger and bigger and bigger, and you know, when we can go in on a microscopic level, of course thus far we have seen everything gets down to like, you know, particle levels, but and then it's like that's the end. Maybe we're gonna that there are, that it goes even smaller and smaller and smaller, and then it could just go bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's kind of like it's a hard thing to wrestle with, either nothingness or everythingness. It's like both of them are just like they're so massive that it's like hard to focus on. But I kind of have always found it to be like I think it's inspiring. The same thing I think about kind of often about dying, and that, as I've tried to explain to my son, maybe I'm doing it wrong, but it's like that, like we are like a recorder, or like, like here's my phone. I have my phone and I can go around and I can make a video and I can like store up a bunch of data. And then once it's broken, it's just this thing that doesn't have any more stuff on it. The stuff just goes away. And that is scary to me. The idea of like, I am collecting experiences and I am creating things and stuff, and like, in 50 to 100 years, people probably won't know David Bowie. I mean, I guess people know Mozart and Beethoven and things like that. I mean, but I don't think that David Bowie has had like the huge fundamental or the benefit of smaller culture or history, like, to be evaluated on those levels. But yeah, so, I mean, I just like that idea, like it's probably the same thing, but like just the oblivion of you no longer existing,
Right.
is a scary thing. But I mean, that's who we are.
The way I look at it, though, and I know I'm probably wrong, but what comforts me in that arena is first law of thermodynamics, being energy cannot be created nor destroyed, only redistributed. So we are comprised of energy. With electricity does make us function. Where does that electricity eventually go? It goes to ground. Energy is attracted to more energy. Therefore, maybe there's no consciousness to this energy, but there is a part of all of us that is going to collect in the earth and be redistributed somewhere else via volcanic activity, whatever. So the circle will continue for us. We just may not be cognizant of it, which, hey, if that's the way it ends, that's the way it ends. But there's a part of us that's always going to be, and it will be in that.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, that is very true. I mean, we are all made up of the stuff that has, or as far as we know, has always existed or began at some beginning point. And it may have come from some other thing around, but I mean, I love this idea of living at the birth of a new scientific paradigm, that we're watching like something changing in real time with the James Webb Telescope, like making all these new discoveries and proving things to be wrong. And that's a very inspiring. It was a real fixation of mine at the beginning of the VSS, this the rite of spring, the whole development of stuff of art and culture of the 20th century, also tied in with scientific revolutions, the way that they work. I don't know if you're familiar with Thomas Kuhn, the author of that. Like, I never would have thought that would live through a massive upheaval of the way that we understand existence, and it's really exciting to be able to see what happened. Of course, it's probably going to take forever for us, not forever, but it's probably going to take a while before we to new understandings. But it's very, that's something I think is super incredible to live through.
Yeah, I mean, we just found out like legitimately in the past few years that gravity it functions in waves. Mm-hmm. And I forget the gentleman's name. He's a UFO. He apparently worked at Area 51. His name escapes me, but he said that 25 years ago that gravity moves in waves, and everyone laughed at him. And now we know that it actually does. It's incredible to me to see that, you know, the conversation around life on other planets has drifted so much into the out of the realm of conspiracy theory and into the realm of like Senate, like, or congressional hearings. Like, this generation, it's both the most terrifying and the most revelatory of, I think, any generation that has come before us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, definitely might say that. I do think that some of that stuff just comes from a societal necessity for a religion, where most of the other religious structures have kind of fallen apart. That, you know, the UFO thing, like even in the 90s and stuff, I was kind of like, there's just a real extreme Christianity undertone to it. And I always thought that kind of bothered me, but I think that there are all kinds of really, you know, legitimate, cool discoveries being made. You know, I'm much more of a Carl Sagan skeptic, and you know, I think, like, you know, extreme claims require extreme evidence or whatever, something like that. You know, I think that is pretty important.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You don't buy the whole cow, you know, and you have to, you know, look under the hood before you buy the car. Mm-hmm. But I think my point with that is just the fact that these things are being discussed in more rational terms.
Right. Yeah.
It shows me that the generation coming up, my daughter is in her 20s, like her generation specifically. Mm-hmm. They're delivering on the promise of what we were trying to accomplish back in the 80s and 90s with the idea of like PC culture, and not so much as like something that's didactic, but more to make it more culturally acceptable to be homosexual, trans, this, that. That's something that I think we were striving for in the 80s and 90s in the microcosm of punk rock. Whereas now it's the discussion. It is what people in that age group are pushing for. I think that generation is going to spawn better leaders than our generation certainly has.
Yeah. I feel like it's kind of a thing, like Generation X was kind of like the people who, for us, it was like, let's tear off the cover and we'll show everybody what is wrong with stuff. And it was like, that was our thing. And that's the thing that other people don't get, you know, like how people get canceled or whatever for just saying something sarcastically or whatever, is because, like, that was our whole thing, was just kind of like, yeah, but did you know that, you know, like, I guess, you know, people used to think that Steve Albini's lyrics were him talking about all of these things that he did. I just couldn't understand that. People didn't understand that it's just like, he is doing a character of like this, you know, showing what is wrong with humanity, like showing off the darkest aspects of humanity. And like Sarah Silverman and stuff, like she, you know, always had these like very racist jokes and like all this kind of stuff, that not to be racist, but to like point out like how inherently racist we are, how bad we are. But so, you know, anyway, Generation X, like think that was our thing. It's just kind of like, look, you know,
yeah,
but not doing anything about it. And I think like that's the great thing of like younger people now are going to like, okay, well, great, you guys talked about, look at what is fucked up about stuff. We're busy trying to like fix it. And yeah, I mean, I think it's great to see a lot of things like proactively happening and people expanding their awareness of people. I can think about, like for my parents' generation, it was just sort of like exotic people were Germans, and like it's changed so much. Like the world has gotten smaller. We've become more aware of each other, and trying to be able to really allow and create diversity is always, of course, a challenge, but it's like something that people need to be open to attempt.
But you could see where I think it really starts with the baby boomers and the hippie movement, the Vietnam War, and civil rights. They informed us as their children, Gen Xers. We took it a step further with really, like, as you said, ripping the cover off and showing everyone what's wrong with things. So the millennials and whatever these generations are called thereafter, we parented them, therefore they're going to take what we'd imparted to its logical conclusion. So we were on the right track. Our parents were on the right track. It's just, sadly, like changing the zeitgeist and culture of a nation takes centuries.
Yeah. Yes, it's slow process, but I mean, we're intellectually evolving as we are, physically evolving. So it's, I hope that we don't run out of time in the destruction that we've created also. And, but I do believe that sort of like the resilience of people can be pretty impressive, and we can come up with things. I'm optimistic and hopeful that the future is going to be good or like constructive. But of course, human history is full of just like the worst atrocities and like terrible failures. So. Yeah, we're also kind of at a precipice where it is like, we're making huge discoveries, but we're also going to have to make some very huge sacrifices to be able to move forward too.
Yeah, especially considering the fact that in the Atlantic Ocean right now, if you were to go down towards Florida, the water's 90 degrees.
Yeah.
Because the polar ice caps are almost gone, so the exchange of cold and warm water is not occurring any longer. We need to wake up fast now, and that change, that century change in zeitgeist needs to be sped up to about 3 years.
Yeah, it's I mean, in a lot of ways it's kind of too late already, but we're just trying to find a way to mitigate the damage really that is about to happen or continue to happen. And I was just wondering about the other day, like looking at the fires in Hawaii, and just that everything is on fire and everything is like just weather disasters, but still people aren't accepting the reality and like really doing something about it. It's very, very frustrating. And everyone goes like, well, it's the baby boomers and they're all running the government. And it's like, they're not baby boomers that are in the government. You're talking about, our generation, or the people that are mostly involved with a lot of this stuff and not doing anything about it. So, yeah, it's.
Well, on the positive side of things, what you've created with this record, I think, is an adequate soundtrack to what's occurring currently, because I mean it's not all doom and gloom, but as I stated at the beginning of this conversation, there is that something creeping, just over your shoulder, like it's about to happen, it's going to happen, and that's what makes it apropos of the time. And you guys did a phenomenal job. I am so enamored of this album, and I hope everyone else really allows it to affect them the way I did. And I think if anyone has an ear for music and really appreciates nuance, they're going to love it.
Well, thank you very much. That's great. Yeah, I mean, I hope that people will like it. We sort of felt that, it's not as like multiply layered and as super structured as some the first two records because of the circumstances of how we were doing it. But I think like there is still a lot to it, and that was it was like it wasn't intended for anyone else. It was intended for us, and so I guess it's just like I hope other people are going to like it, but we did it for ourselves. So I guess that's what everyone says about art, but I don't know. I do think that you create art so that other people can interpret it and take it in themselves.
And in this case, I certainly interpreted it in my own manner. So you can only imagine what other people are going to get from it. Mm-hmm. I can't wait to hear this on vinyl and just put the headphones on, put it on the turntable, and experience it that way. I almost feel at a disadvantage because I've only heard it digitally. So when I get the record, I'll email you my my thoughts on it. How about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, I would definitely love to hear what you think of it, because it was kind of I like the way that it sounds. That way it sounds so much more as it should. It sounds like the first few records where there's so much more bass information there, where like of course you can have way more in a digital file, but it's just kind of like it's just everything, which is how you have to make music these days for it to sound interesting, is that it has to be overdriven like that. So yeah, comparison of the two formats, I think that's a great thing. I hope I would love to hear what you think of it.
As soon as I'll order one tonight, and I'll let you know as soon as it arrives. I'll listen to it and I'll shoot you an email.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have the guys send one to you.
That'd be great.
You do that. Send me your address and we can do that. Send one.
I appreciate that very much.
Sure, no problem.
All right. I will let you get back to your afternoon, and I hope to talk to you again. This has been great.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I had a lot of fun. It's nice to meet you, and thanks again for taking time and doing it. And I appreciate it.
As I appreciate it as well. Good to see you, Dave.
Yeah, you too. Okay.
Take care.
Yeah. Bye.
There it is, folks. My discussion with Dave Clifford. As I said in the beginning, I really think that this conversation had two parts. The first part being music and the getting to know you thing, and then we very spontaneously shifted gears and got very personal, intensely so. As I said in the beginning, Dave's entire discography means a lot to me. I'm a long-time fan of what he's done and continues to do, and I hope that they continue to create even more music together as Pleasure Forever. He's been Dave of Pleasure Forever. I've been Peter. You've been beautiful, and this has been The Book of Very, Very Bad Things podcast. Take care of one another, and I will see you again soon.